My name is Daniel, and for nearly 6 years I have shared my life with Michael. To anyone who looks from the outside, we appear to be the picture of stability, two men building a home together, managing careers and moving through the rhythms of everyday life with quiet familiarity. Friends often joke that we are inseparable, the kind of couple that seems to know each other's thoughts before they are spoken. For a long time, I believed that too. When Michael and I first met, our connection was electric, the kind that made every glance feel charged with possibility. We met at a university event, both of us drawn into conversation by accident, and by the end of the evening, it felt inevitable that we would see each other again. Those early years were filled with laughter, spontaneous trips, and long nights of whispered promises. We planned futures together, imagined the home we now live in, and clung to the excitement of having found someone who made the world feel less lonely. But somewhere along the way, that excitement thinned. The love was not gone, not entirely, but its edges had dulled. Our conversations, once brimming with curiosity, grew practical, reduced to schedules, groceries, and bills. Our evenings became predictable: dinner, television, and the quiet hum of phones glowing in the dark before sleep. I often told myself that this was what commitment meant: comfort over fireworks, companionship over passion. Yet a part of me longed for something that had slowly slipped from reach, though I dared not name it. Michael was kind, reliable, and patient. He worked long hours as a project manager and carried the weight of responsibility with steady composure. But his attention had shifted almost entirely toward work. Late nights at the office were frequent, and even when he was home, his mind often seemed elsewhere. Tangled in deadlines and meetings I could barely follow. I wanted to believe that this was temporary, a season we would endure, yet a growing silence stretched between us. I, too, was not blameless. My own work as a teacher consumed me, and I often returned home drained, my energy too spent to reach for the intimacy we once shared. We were together, yes, but sometimes it felt as though we were living parallel lives in the same house. The first time I noticed the distance, it was subtle: his laugh sounding more polite than genuine when I told a story, or his absence of questions about my day. I brushed it off as exhaustion until one evening when he fell asleep on the couch while I sat beside him, reading a book. I glanced at him, the lines of stress visible on his face even in rest, and realized how long it had been since I felt like I truly had his attention. The realization stung, not because I believed he loved me less, but because I feared I had somehow stopped mattering in the way I once did. It was around this time that I met Ethan. He was a new teacher at the school, full of energy and humor. The kind of person who could make an entire room lean in just by telling a story. From the beginning, our interactions were easy, light-hearted, and unguarded. There was no intention behind them, at least not on my part, least the pleasant relief of being seen and heard after so many weeks of feeling invisible. I found myself looking forward to conversations with him, though I told myself it was only because it was refreshing to connect with someone so open. Yet, as I drove home from work, I sometimes replayed his jokes in my head, smiling to myself. In the quiet of the car, before pulling into the driveway of the home I shared with Michael, I never mentioned Ethan to Michael beyond casual remarks, nor did Michael ask. That in itself revealed something to me. We had stopped exchanging the small details of our days, the stories of people who filled them. I did not know whether he noticed the absence or whether he preferred the silence. The days moved forward, marked by the same patterns: me leaving early for school, him returning late from work, and our evenings spent beside one another without truly connecting. And yet, beneath that routine, I felt something stirring, something I could neither dismiss nor fully admit. Ethan was simply a colleague, a friend at most, but his presence highlighted the absence of warmth I felt at home. I told myself it was harmless, that I was simply grateful for companionship. But deep inside, I sensed the fragile line I was approaching. I remember one evening distinctly, standing at the sink while washing dishes, listening to Michael's voice from the living room as he spoke on the phone about another late-night meeting. The words blurred, and my chest tightened, not from anger, but from a hollow ache. I wondered when we had stopped being the center of each other's lives, as I dried my hands. I thought of Ethan's laughter earlier that day and felt a pang of guilt for how much comfort it brought me. That night, lying beside Michael in the quiet dark, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I knew I would never confess these thoughts aloud, but they pressed against me with growing weight. I loved Michael, and yet I was beginning to realize that love alone was no longer enough to quiet the yearning inside me. Something was shifting, and I could no longer pretend not to feel it. In the weeks that followed, my connection with Ethan deepened in ways I had not anticipated. It began innocently enough, conversations in the teacher's lounge between classes, laughter exchanged over coffee mugs, moments of shared exhaustion during long staff meetings. He had an ease about him, a liveliness that made the monotony of the school day feel lighter. Where others grumbled about schedules and policies, Ethan found humor, spinning complaints into stories that left me smiling long after they ended. At first, I told myself it was nothing more than friendship, a natural bond between colleagues. But there was something in the way he looked at me, something attentive, almost searching, that I had not felt from Michael in months. I caught myself watching him more closely, noticing how his smile creased at the corners, how his voice softened when our conversations drifted away from work. Those details stayed with me in quiet moments, shadows of warmth that slipped into the emptiness I carried home. With Michael, the silence grew heavier. He asked fewer questions, and I offered fewer answers. Nights at the dinner table passed with the clinking of cutlery and the occasional distracted remark about deadlines. I wanted to bridge the distance, to tell him about my days, but whenever I tried, his responses came delayed or absent-minded, his gaze drawn back to his phone or laptop. I told myself he was tired, that his work demanded too much of him. Yet beneath the rationalization, resentment began to stir. It was during one particularly long Friday afternoon that I realized the shift with Ethan had gone beyond casual. We had stayed behind after classes, both of us grading papers in the quiet of the staff room. A storm rumbled outside, rain beating against the windows, and the usual bustle of students and teachers had faded into stillness. Conversation flowed easily, slipping from classroom frustrations into personal histories. He asked about Michael, not in a prying way, but with genuine curiosity, and I found myself struggling to answer. I spoke of our relationship in vague terms, glossing over details, choosing words that sounded steadier than I felt. Ethan listened closely, his expression unreadable, and then shared stories of his own relationships, some brief, some lingering, his voice tinged with honesty that felt disarming. In that moment, it struck me how long it had been since I had spoken with such openness, how much I missed being known. That evening lingered in my mind through the weekend. I replayed our conversation while standing at the grocery store, while folding laundry, while lying awake beside Michael's slumbering form. Guilt pressed against me, whispering that these thoughts were dangerous. Yet the memory brought me comfort, and I clung to it quietly. I wanted to believe it was harmless, that a friendship built on laughter and shared confidences was nothing to fear. But my heart quickened whenever Ethan's name appeared on my phone. Texts began as brief exchanges about work, but soon strayed into personal territory, jokes, late-night observations, small confessions of loneliness or frustration. Each message felt like a secret spark, a private light I kept hidden from the man who lay beside me in bed. Michael, meanwhile, seemed increasingly absorbed in his own world. He spent long hours at the office, sometimes returning past midnight, his shoulders heavy with stress. When I asked about his day, his answers were curt, as though he could not bear to relive them. I stopped asking after a while, retreating into my own silence, telling myself it was better not to add to his burden. But even as I pulled away, I longed for him to notice, to see me, to fight for the closeness we had lost. Instead, the gap between us widened, and into that gap, Ethan's presence slipped quietly, filling spaces I no longer knew how to share. With Michael. The first time I realized how dangerous this had become was during a school outing. Several teachers, including Ethan and I, accompanied students on a day trip. Amid the chaos of organizing groups and keeping track of restless teenagers, there was a moment when Ethan and I flew, and ourselves standing apart, watching the others. A joke passed between us, and as we laughed, our eyes lingered on one another longer than they should have. The world around us blurred for a heartbeat, and the air carried a charge I could not dismiss. Nothing happened, yet everything changed. That night, I lay awake, replaying that moment with a mix of exhilaration and dread. I asked myself what I was doing, whether I was betraying Michael simply by feeling this way. I told myself it was just attention, just companionship, but beneath the excuses, a truth clawed to the surface. I wanted more. I began noticing small things, how I checked my reflection before seeing Ethan, how my mood lifted when he entered the room, how disappointment pricked when our paths did not cross. The awareness unsettled me, yet I did not pull back. If anything, I leaned in further, chasing the warmth his presence brought. Still, guilt lingered, a shadow following every thought of him. I avoided speaking Michael's name when I was with Ethan, as though saying it aloud would break the spell. One evening, after another late dinner, eaten mostly in silence, Michael kissed me absently on the forehead before returning to his computer. The gesture felt hollow, routine, stripped of affection. As I sat there, staring at the glow of his screen, illuminating his tired face, I realized how little space there was left for me in his life. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Ethan's name lighting the screen. I hesitated before opening the message, aware that in doing so, I was making a choice I could not easily undo. The words were simple, ordinary even, but the weight they carried was anything but. In that moment, I knew I was already too far along a path I had promised myself I would never take. It happened on a night that felt ordinary at first. One of those evenings when exhaustion clung to me after a long day of teaching. Michael had texted that he would be staying late once again, caught up in another round of meetings that promised to stretch past midnight. I read his message without emotion, placing the phone face down on the table as if the screen itself had grown heavy. The silence of the apartment pressed in around me, and for the first time, I admitted how little comfort home offered anymore. Out of habit, I reached for my phone again, scrolling aimlessly until I saw Ethan's name. He had texted earlier, a playful remark about something that had happened in class. Without thinking, I replied, and soon we were trading messages back and forth, laughter slipping into confessions of how tired we both felt, how the week had worn us down. His final message was simple: "Want to grab a drink?" Yet it carried the weight of a decision I knew would change everything. I hesitated only a moment before agreeing. We met at a quiet bar near campus, the kind of place where dim lights and hushed conversations made the rest of the world seem far away. Ethan was already there, seated in a booth, his smile warm as I slid in across from him. The hours passed in easy conversation, the kind that flowed so naturally it felt inevitable. We spoke about our students, our frustrations, our families. But beneath the words, a current of unspoken tension pulsed stronger with each passing moment. His eyes held mine longer than they should have, his laughter brushing against something inside me that had been dormant for too long. When the drinks were finished and the night stretched before us, neither of us seemed ready to part. Outside, the rain had returned, steady and insistent, blurring the glow of the streetlights. We lingered beneath the awning, neither moving, until he finally said, almost in a whisper, "Do you want to come over?" My heart raced, torn between resistance and surrender, but my feet carried me forward before my mind could catch up. Ethan's apartment was small, modest, filled with the scattered marks of a life lived alone. Books stacked haphazardly on shelves, a jacket draped across a chair, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. It was unremarkable, and yet it felt more alive than the home I had left behind. We stood in the doorway, silence stretching between us, the weight of choice pressing down. Then, without warning, he stepped closer, his hand brushing mine, and the space between us dissolved. The first kiss was tentative, almost hesitant, but it ignited something fierce, something I had been starving for. My body responded before reason could intervene, and in that moment, I stopped resisting. The night unfolded in a blur of touch and whispered confessions, passion tangled with guilt in every breath. For the first time in months, I felt wanted, seen, alive. Yet even as I gave in to the moment, a voice deep inside whispered that I was crossing a line I could never uncross. When morning came, the clarity of daylight sharpened the weight of what I had done. Ethan was beside me, his expression soft, almost tender, as though this had been inevitable for him all along. But for me, guilt surged like a tide, pulling me under. I thought of Michael, of the trust I had shattered, of the years we had built together, and the shame nearly suffocated me. I dressed in silence, my movements hurried, avoiding Ethan's gaze. Before leaving, I managed a strained smile, muttering, "Something about seeing him at work," though both of us knew nothing would be the same. Driving home, I rehearsed excuses in my head, desperate to cloak the truth. Michael was still at the office when I arrived, his absence both a relief and a reminder of why I had allowed myself to stray. I showered, scrubbing at my skin as if water alone could wash away what I had done. But no matter how hard I tried, the memory clung to me, refusing to fade. Days turned into weeks, and the affair continued. What began as a single night became stolen hours, hurried messages, and careful lies. Each encounter carried both exhilaration and dread, a dangerous duality I could not seem to escape. I told myself I needed Ethan, that he filled a void Michael had long since abandoned, but the truth was more complicated. I craved the passion, yes, but I also feared the emptiness that awaited me without it. At home, Michael grew more distant, his exhaustion deepening, his silences longer. He noticed the change in me of that I was certain, but he said nothing, perhaps unwilling or unable to confront what lingered beneath the surface. I, in turn, offered him little, retreating further into secrecy, weaving a fragile world with Ethan while watching the one I had built with Michael crumble. The lies grew heavier. Kai invented meetings, errands, reasons to stay late. Each falsehood chipped away at the person I thought I was, leaving behind someone I barely recognized. Yet when Ethan's arms wrapped around me, when his voice softened, with affection, the guilt dulled, replaced by the fleeting illusion of belonging. Still, beneath it all, I knew the truth could not remain hidden forever. One evening, as I returned home later than usual, I found Michael sitting on the couch, his laptop closed for once, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my stomach lurch. He asked no questions, offered no accusations, yet the silence between us was sharper than words. I muttered a half-hearted explanation about staying late, and he nodded slowly, though the doubt in his gaze told me he no longer believed. That night, lying awake beside him, I realized how fragile everything had become. The world I had built in shadows was collapsing. I told myself I could end it with Ethan, that I could reclaim what had been lost with Michael, but even as I thought it, I knew the grip of the affair was too strong. And somewhere deep down, I sensed that the truth was already beginning to surface. Whether I was ready or not, the unraveling came quietly, not with shouting or slammed doors. but with a stillness that felt far more dangerous. It was a Saturday morning when Michael found the message. I had been careless, leaving my phone on the kitchen counter while I stepped into the shower. When I returned, steam clinging to my skin, he was sitting at the table, my phone in his hand, his face pale and unreadable. The screen was dark by then, but I knew what he had seen: Nathan's words, tender and unguarded, the kind of words no colleague would ever send. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching until I thought I might collapse beneath it. Finally, Michael lifted his eyes, and in them I saw a mixture of hurt and disbelief, so raw it pierced me deeper than any anger could. "How long?" he asked, his voice low, steady in a way that frightened me. My mouth opened, closed, then opened again, fumbling for air, for excuses that would not come. The truth, stark and undeniable, pressed against my chest until I could not contain it. "A few months," I whispered, the admission shattering something between us that could never be repaired. He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening as though each second he remained in the room cost him immeasurable strength. "With Ethan." The sound of his name spoken aloud made me flinch. I nodded again, unable to look at him. His hands trembled as he set the phone down, and then he stood, moving toward the window as though he needed distance, even in the small space of our kitchen. "Why?" The word was heavy, not a demand for details, but a cry from somewhere deep, a plea to make sense of what I had destroyed. I tried to speak, to explain the loneliness, the silence, the way Ethan's attention had filled a void I no longer knew how to voice, but every word sounded hollow in my own ears. Michael turned, his eyes brimming with a pain I had never seen in him before. "I gave you everything I had, Daniel. I trusted you, and this is what you chose." His voice cracked on the last word, and I felt myself shrinking under the weight of his grief, wanted to reach for him, to close the distance, but my body refused to move. Guilt anchored me in place, heavier than chains. The hours that followed blurred into fragments: Michael packing a small bag, me begging him to stay, his silence louder than any refusal. He left without slamming the door, but the sound of it closing behind him echoed like a final sentence. In the days that followed, the apartment felt hollow, stripped of warmth. Michael's absence was everywhere: the empty side of the bed, the untouched coffee mug in the cupboard, the quiet hum of a home no longer shared. I tried calling, sending messages that went unanswered, each attempt a reminder of the chasm I had created. Ethan, meanwhile, reached out often, his concern evident, his voice a balm I should have craved. Yet every word from him now felt tainted by the reality of what it had cost me. When I looked at him, I no longer saw comforts, I saw betrayal, mine and his, entwined. The passion that once thrilled me now seemed a poor substitute for the steady love I had shattered. At work, whispers circulated quietly, though no one dared ask directly. I carried myself through the halls with a practiced calm, but inside I unraveled. Nights were the hardest. Alone in the dark, I replayed every moment with Michael, from the first spark of our meeting to the gradual erosion that had led us here. I told myself I had sought affection, attention, understanding, yet beneath those justifications, I knew the truth. I had chosen escape over honesty, silence over vulnerability, and in doing so, I had destroyed the very thing I claimed to protect. Weeks passed before Michael agreed to meet. We sat across from one another in a cafe, strangers bound by shared history. He looked thinner, older somehow, though his composure was steady. I apologized again, until the word itself felt meaningless. He listened without interruption, his face unreadable. Then finally spoke. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I hope you learn from this, because love isn't just about feeling seen when it's easy. It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard." His words struck deeper than any accusation. We parted without resolution, no promises of reconciliation, only the quiet understanding that what we once had could never be the same. Ethan remained in my life for a time, but the affair crumbled beneath the weight of its origin. We tried to build something from the ashes, but trust was absent, and without it, everything felt hollow. Eventually, we drifted apart, leaving me alone with the wreckage I had created. In the solitude that followed, I confronted truths I had long avoided, that silence can be as corrosive as lies. That yearning unspoken festers until it consumes, and that infidelity, no matter how it begins, leaves scars deeper than desire. I began writing in a journal, documenting the moments, the choices, the fractures, hoping that by naming them, I could strip them of their power. It did not erase the past, but it offered clarity, a way to understand not only what I had done, but why. And in that reflection, I found a small measure of peace. Telling the truth had cost me nearly everything, but perhaps that was the point. Secrets thrive in the dark, feeding on silence. But once spoken, they demand reckoning. My reckoning had come, painful and relentless, yet necessary. I do not know what the future holds, whether Michael will ever forgive me, whether love will find me again, but I know this: the truth I finally shared set me free, even as it left me broken. And sometimes, freedom and brokenness are the same thing.